Greeting everybody. I trust that you have been doing well. So for today's off-campus sessions, we are going to continue from where we left off last week. So for those who were not here in class last week, we looked at chapter 3, which is about test development process. So I want to take this opportunity to recap what we discussed before continuing to the last 2 points of this chapter. So there are 9 steps that teachers should always follow before and after designing a test. Firstly, teachers should always assess the constraints and resources. Do I have all the resources and materials available for use if I want to design a progress test for my students, for example? Will I spend too much time on it? Do I have enough time for it? Do I have help from my peers or fellow teachers? Will I need to spend any money on designing this test? And if so, will I have enough or spend too much? So these are some of the questions that you should be asking yourselves before designing a test. Secondly, teachers should always determine the purpose of the test. By that I mean teachers should always make sure to test students what they have taught them. So if you want to test their study progress after 3 months of studying, then test what you have taught them for the last 3 months. Thirdly, teachers should make it clear whether they will base their test content on the course syllabus or course objectives. This is important because whatever you choose will determine what you put in your test, whether the content is from the book or from the objectives the course expects students to achieve at the end. Step number 5 is determining the weights and the contents. So this basically means deciding, which objective of your test, which section of your test should be given more scores or marks to. However, only individual students know and can assign scores and importance to specific sections because only they know what to prioritize that will meet their own objectives and the objectives of the course or lesson. And after determining the weights and contents, you can start considering how you will determine the test, right? Administer the test, I'm sorry. Should you go for discrete point testing items or integrative? Ideally, there should be a mixture of the two because not only do we want to see our students' communicative competence, but we also want to see their communicative performance. So a mixture of both would be ideal. But then we have step number 7, which is where you actually decide what testing items, discrete points or integrative, direct or indirect, it's where you actually decide what should be used or included in your test. So ultimately, it will come down to your priorities, your objectives, and all the steps you have gone through previously until this point. And that is pretty much a summary of what we talked about last week. So this video will pick up from there. And remember, the next parts of this will be probably the most important ones. So kind of keep track of that. Now, it is really important to note that after step 7, tests or testing items or tasks need to be constructed because you now have all the tools and a clear roadmap to work with. However, there are still some principles of designing good tests, and test items that you need to keep in mind as you are putting things together. Firstly, that is reliability of the test. Simply put, it refers to the consistency of test results. Now, this may still be confusing, but I'll try to make it a little bit more simple. For example, if your test has 5 items and your students get all 5 items correct, would you say that their results are reliable? Can you trust that your students understand the lesson well since they got everything right? Okay, now try giving them 20 items next time. Will they still be able to get closer to 20 items if not full? So that means having more test items in a test can ensure the reliability of your students' test results. Okay, so for example, if you have 30 items and they are still able to get 30 items correct, then that is more reliable than getting 5 items correct, because it's not enough for us, enough of a sample for us to base their understanding on. Okay, but you need to keep in mind too though, don't just add items for the sake of having more items in a test, which means making the test longer unnecessarily. If that is the case, then your test is still not reliable despite having a lot of items. So make sure that the addition of more items, contribute to actually measuring the students' abilities and their understanding. Secondly, there should only be one correct answer for one test item to ensure reliability in test results. So here there are two important terms you need to know. These are very important and you need to keep in mind. We have the first one is intra-rater reliability, and the second one is inter-rater, okay, reliability. Now, it's pretty simple. The intra-rater reliability is when the same teacher, for example, you as a teacher, correcting your students' test paper multiple times, 2 or 3 times, and you still see the same scores or test results. That shows that your students' test results are reliable, right? Okay, because you have corrected the paper multiple times and still come to the same scores. And the other one is inter-rater reliability. This opposite of the intra-rater reliability, this one means that multiple teachers, not just you, but many other teachers who come in and correct your students' test papers, and they come to the same conclusion, they come to the same results. That shows the reliability of the test results, of the students' test results, right? So again, intra-rater means you, the only one, correcting the same test paper multiple times and getting the same scores. The inter-rater means that multiple teachers correct the same test paper and come to the same result. If that doesn't happen, that means something is wrong, okay? It's not reliable. Another principle of good tests and test items is validity. Unlike reliability, validity refers to when a test measures what it is intended to measure. Simply put, it is similar to how we define indirect testing, where if you want to see if your students can speak and you instead ask them to write or complete multiple choice questions, then that lacks validity because we don't really, assess their actual speaking ability, which means we don't know if they can actually speak. So that is what validity is when it comes to good test design, right? Okay, so make sure that it is intended to test what it is intended to test, what it's supposed to test. But there are 3 types of validity that you need to remember. Firstly, we have the construct validity, right? Yeah. The construct validity, which asks you this question: does the test really measure the skill or concept it's supposed to measure? For example, if you test students' ability to use certain vocabulary, then construct a test that will help you achieve that objective. Don't construct a test that doesn't contain the parts where students actually use the vocabulary, right? For example, testing vocabulary, but then you ask students to read a long reading text and see if they can understand it. They're not really using the vocabulary. They'll just be simply trying to understand the vocabulary. So it's different. Okay, the construction has no validity. And the second one is the content validity, which I believe that you may have guessed what it is. It basically means, do the content items of the test relate to what you have taught? Do the content items meet the objectives of the test, of your core syllabus, of your lesson, right? Remember, we test only what we teach. Last but not least, that is face validity. Now, for the face validity, As the name suggests, it is about the face of the paper. Does the test paper appear to test the right thing? So it's about how the test looks at first glance from your perspective, your students' perspective, the other people's perspective. Does it look like it tests what it's made to test? Like if it is an essay writing task and you barely see any space, for students to write, then just by the looks of it, without having to read the instruction, we can immediately feel that it lacks that face validity. It lacks something that tells us that it's supposed to test writing, you know what I mean? Just by the looks of it, without reading anything, okay? By the looks of it, by the appearance of the test, we can see whether it tests what it's actually made to test. Authenticity is another principle we need to keep in mind. Now, this term means real life, okay, or real situation. Even though a test isn't really real life, but we should always try to make it, simulate real life situations to the best of our ability. So again, a language test is not a real life situation, but the test, especially achievement test, should be designed to simulate it, right? To simulate some sort of real situations, or at least create a sense, okay, of that authenticity. So that also comes down to what we choose, right? The type of tests and the type of testing we choose to integrate into our test. For example, if you lean towards integrative or communicative testing items, then that will create a sense of authenticity, even though it's not really real, you know what I mean? For example, asking students to do a role play, to create a conversation that simulates real life situations, that creates authenticity, even though they are not in a real shop, you know what I mean? So yeah, so even tests have authenticity to it, but they are not completely authentic. Another one is the impact of your test. How will your test impact you as a teacher? Because this test will shape the way that you teach and how you teach. How will it impact your students? Will the students feel fair? Will they feel motivated, rewarded? What about stakeholders? Stakeholders include people such as parents, school leaders, employers, right? And all these sorts of people. So will the test results of your test help make any changes to the way they or those people see education, right? What about society? How will the students' results shape their future career and how society will see them? For example, the impact of your practicum, right? So your practicum scores should create a huge impact on society because they will see just how good you are at teaching, for example. So it's a good representation, a good impact. And the education systems, will your test influence the way the course is designed, okay, the teaching method, the curriculum, etc. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. And you also need to consider one thing that seems to be present throughout our chapter here, the backwash effect, and you need to know it. It's very important to know what a backwash effect is. We've already discussed it. It can be negative, it can be positive. So a positive or a negative backwash effect will, depend on how you react or how the test influence you, right? So for example, how will this test shape the way you teach? Will the test force students to teach or force you to teach only what is tested and not what is needed? For example, you only focus on grammar teaching because you feel like it only appears in the exam, so you neglect the communicative aspect of the grammar. That creates a negative backwash effect because of that test, it shapes the way you teach students. You know what I mean? So yeah, kind of know exactly what a backwash effect is. The influence a test have on you, your teaching, and the students' learning. Okay. Last but not least, it's practicality. This is similar to the first step that we discussed. It is basically about the availability of resources and materials, the time, the effort, the finance. I mean, if you do too much or too little of one thing, that isn't really practical for you and for your students. So consider whether you have the resources, the materials, the people, the time, the effort, the money to make sure that you can construct one test. And after the test is constructed, will it be practical for students, okay, in terms of the effect, the impact that it has on them, okay? And yeah, overall, it's just basically the relationship between, okay, the resources, the design of your test, okay, the administration of the test, right? How you administer the test, right? Is it practical in terms of that? Okay, so it's basically the same and very similar to the first step that we discussed. Okay, so again, don't stress too much about the practicality. Okay, it's just about the time, right? Is it too long? Is it too short? Okay, does it have too many items? Does it have too few items? Okay, and all these sorts of things, right? So it's about the resources, the materials, the content. Okay, yeah, is it overall practical, right? Is it something that we can make use of? Okay, yeah, it's basically it. Okay, so that brings us to step number 8. And now that you get to this step, you should have a draft. Okay, you should already have a draft of a test paper consisting of everything you need. Uh, like everything else, by the way, we need to review and revise because we may not have looked at everything in detail as we are designing the test, in the process of designing the test. So again, check for reliability, validity, authenticity, practicality, and impact. If possible, have multiple teachers to help you review since they may see things you might miss. And there is this list that you can base your review and revision on to see if your test is good to go. If your test checks all the boxes, it should be okay. All right, if it misses something, that changes, the changes will have to be made, right? Will have to be adjusted, adopted, adapted, whatever you need in order to make sure that it meets some of these, at least most of these items on this list, okay? That ensures that the test is, very well assembled, okay? Very well controlled, assembled, and put together. All right, the last step finally is to develop scoring methods, even though I think developing scoring methods should be somewhere in the middle, because once you get to step 5, 4, 5, 6, you should already know what scoring methods you would go for, right? But they put it at the end and it is what it is. Basically, it's how you choose, how you decide how you will score your students in the test, right? Should you go for objective scoring methods, right? Or subjective scoring methods? The objective scoring methods, you know what I mean. We have already discussed it like multiple times. Objective scoring method is a lot easier because there's only one correct answer. And it is more reliable too because no matter how you look at it, there's only one correct answer. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's only one correct answer. It's just that all the constructors of the test will just need to agree on one correct answer and everybody will go for it. You know what I mean? There will never be two different answers for one item because we all agree that that is the answer for that. Now, the subjective scoring method, however, will be a lot more difficult since you need a good marking criteria to base on, right? To base your scores on. And even then, different teachers will give different scores based on their priorities. You may prioritize this aspect of the writing task, for example, the accuracy, and the other teachers may prioritize the content of the writing. So that will still create the imbalance of how you score students. And yeah, so again, choose a method that is best for you, best for your class, that is appropriate for your purpose, your students' goals, and your own objectives. Okay, yeah, if you attempt to choose a subjective scoring method, then only you knows what you want to focus on. Only you, okay, only you. And that is the end. That is the end of our chapter 3. So please, it's okay. Thank you so much. Yes.